welcome to our webinar about Girl Out of Place by Syl Van Duyn, translated by Ernestine Hoegen. They are both with me today to discuss the book and share their insights. So, to start with, Syl, tell us how you came to write this book.
Nora inspired me, I must say. I met her and I learned about her life story, and then I wanted to write a story about it. That's the short version. But the long version is like, I met her in a train, I didn't know her. We start talking. We talked for 2 hours until the train reached its destination. And we saw each other after that train trip as well, and we became friends. And she was a very special woman. She was in her 80s then, and I never had met such a person of 80 who was still a young girl at the same time. She was full of life, very interested in everything, and very curious. And so when I learned that she was born on Java in the Dutch Indies, and she was like there during the Second World War with the Japanese occupation, and then wandering around the globe after the Second World War, I was so interested in this story, and I asked her, can I write a book about it? And she was very much, it was her task in life that this story was not forgotten. And so she said, yes, if you, yeah. And I was amazed because it was a very big trust she put in me. But then I asked my children about the same topic, and they didn't know about it. So so it made me also feel very strongly that I wanted to write it, to pass the story to a new generation. And writing the story, I discovered I was triggered by it because I really forgot that I remembered then that my father had been there as a soldier after the war to restore law and order in the Dutch colonies. They didn't succeed, but and he never talked about it. And so writing the story was also reconnecting with my dad. He passed away on a young age, so unfortunately I couldn't ask questions anymore, but that's what triggered me to write the story. Yeah.
And Ernestine, what appealed to you about the story that made you want to translate it?
Well, it's a very captivating story. It's exciting, but in particular, it was the lightness of the book and the approach. You experience together with the protagonist this whole story through the eyes of a 15-year-old girl, and it's written with a certain zest for life. You follow this teenager coming out of this camp, struggling to reconnect with the world, with her life, to find a home. And it's written with a lot of dialogue, and it's a different way of approaching the subject, really, because there's lots of wonderful books out there, diaries, memoirs, published diaries, history books, fiction, and often adults reflecting on their childhood in Indonesia and being in a camp and coming out of the camp. But this is straight through the eyes of the 15-year-old, and I really like that approach. It makes it very palatable, and you can easily identify with the girl in the story.
And did you have any personal connection with the Dutch East Indies in your family?
Yes, I do. Yes. My mother was in one of the camps on Java, my grandparents, and there's a family connection with people living in Indonesia and working there and leading their lives there. And still there's a connection. Yes, so that the family background also obviously made that I was always open to this kind of book, and I'm always reading this kind of book and wanting to know more and learn more. Yes, there is a family interest, definitely.
So Syl, how much historical research did you need to do to get yourself into the sort of context of it?
Well, I did quite a lot, but it was probably too much. but I was so triggered by the topic, the subject, because I didn't know very much about it, except some history lessons from my high school and some things in the paper. So then I started reading about it, quite a lot of books. Nora suggested books because she's an expert on the topic. And I also, if you look on the internet, there's a lot of archive material, film, which is really interesting to see. And that triggered me a lot. Once you are on the net, you can't stop. You have, I want to see this, I want to see that. There are a few Dutch documentaries which are very good from this. It's not only the period the book is in, but I started to research the whole colonial past. So it was really educating for me. Yeah, it's a nice stage of the writing because everything is possible, So yeah,
and of course, everyone is now wanting to go back to the colonial period and change the history because
yes, of course, yes,
the way it was written was from the point of the colonizers, and now we want to have more insight into it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
There's more interest, I think, in revisiting.
That's absolutely true. Yeah, yeah. So I was really, and that makes it also very up to date now because there is a discussion. How do you how do you say it in English?
Decolonize.
Decolonize. Position in this history. I mean, if you're from there and if you are the one who was colonized, you can't escape it. But if you're living here and you're not, you can also, like me, I didn't know anything about it, but I know more about it now. So that's a good thing.
And Ernestine, it's the first time you've translated something fictional. So what was that process like and what did you discover?
Well, there's a lot of similarities with translating non-fiction, but there's an interesting point in the translation process when you realize that you really have to put away the original Dutch manuscript and start working solely with your first draft or your second draft and try to bring that alive in the new language. And that means maybe diverging slightly in syntax and sometimes sentences and paragraphs from the original. But you have to sort of take this, well, I call it a leap of faith. It's a scary moment because you think, oh, wow, am I going to alter it too much or do it injustice or something? But there's this moment where you really have to just work with the English text. And it was actually, once I tried doing that and started doing that, it was quite exciting because you start really hearing the voices in the other language. And I think, that was interesting for me to translate fiction and to experience that. The creativity, I suppose, that's also involved in bringing alive voices in a different language. It was fun. I loved doing it. Okay, and also the second thing is that I also realized that you do really, I mean, you always need that with books and text, but you really do need a good editor to help with the finishing touches and have you quite got the tone right. And in that, I really enjoyed working together with you. It was a good experience, big learning curve.
Yes, I enjoyed working with you too. And thanks for being, aware of the nuances and willing to accept changes, which some translators not. Still, why did you choose to start the book at the end of the war, when she's coming out of the camp?
It was absolutely no doubt about it that it had to start there because there is the change. I wanted to say that Ernestine did a very good job in translating it. Speaking about translation, I'm very happy with the translation. It's even better in the English. So, and talking about the point of attack of the story, it must be it must be when she leaves the camp, because I was mainly interested in how do you feel when you're 15, and that was my interest. And then, by the way, you learn a lot about her situation, but the point of attack is a teenage girl in difficult situation. But in the camp, it's full of sorrow. I found it too difficult to write a young adult book in the camp. And I think there are enough diaries and stuff like that who are telling what it was to be in the camp, but there are no records of young people. How do you survive after this? How do you have a life? That was my main interest. How can you be a teenager? So, but she really was. This Nora I met, if you see her, you can't be a woman like that when you're 19 if you haven't been a very living teenager. So she really took her life back again after leaving the camp. So that's why I decided to start there. Yeah.
And Ernestine, one of the challenges for writing young adult fiction is obviously to get the voice of the teenager right. So Syl's done a great job in the Dutch, but you had to then do the same thing in English. So how did you approach that?
I think what really helped was that I spent a large part of my childhood in the UK. So I just tried to reconnect with the sound of my friends as teenagers growing up in the north of England. How did we talk at school? Obviously, this particular teenager, Nell, in the book, lived 75 years ago. So you have to think carefully about what kind of words would they have used at that time, and how much should we bring it up to date to appeal to a new audience. But it was very much also about just listening to the voices I remembered from my own childhood. And also there's something very universal, I think, about any teenager, whether you're Dutch or English or Indonesian. There's always this wanting to experience things and to go out and to have fun. And so this was very much in Neeltje, in the Dutch version's voice, and I just tried to imagine, okay, what would it be like if she was English speaking, and then again put away the Dutch manuscript and just let her speak. And well, it sort of unfolded, I think, it's in itself. And obviously you, Cheryl, corrected some of the expressions and brought it up to date a little bit more. And I think, well, together, the three of us, we managed to capture Nell's voice and got the English text to sing in the same way as the Dutch text.
Yes, I think the other thing was to make sure we didn't use words which were too modern, because obviously it was set back in time a little bit. So,
yes.
You know, you wanted it to sound as though it flowed in English, but you couldn't kind of make it really up to date. So that was also another challenge, I think, to find the right words for the period. Yeah. So, Syl, how hard was it to take a true story and turn it into fiction? You know, were there certain points where you thought, oh, I'm going to leave that out because it doesn't quite fit?
There is an advantage if you write from a true story. The story is there. So you don't have to struggle how to make this logical or something like that. But on the other hand, you know, if you fictionalize it, I wasn't there. So if I let my characters speak, I'm not sure if they were speaking like that. But I try to be as honest and as close to them as was possible. And Ernestine just said about listening to the voice of your character. I did the same thing. I imagined, like, who was Nora when she was 15? How would I feel when I was 15 and my mother is there and you have to leave the place where she is, war or no war? It would be terrible. And I was dreaming about kissing a boy when I was 15. I mean, you can imagine how it is. And then I can also see the authority of the father in that time was completely different than it's now. So they all have their own logic. And I try to be as close to Nora and to Nell as possible. And I'm not sure if it went like that, but Nora said it was very close. So he was happy with it. So that's for me, that's the main thing. And that's one thing. I also had to take care not to become too historical. That it shouldn't be. I wanted to write a young adult book about a girl falling in love, a girl longing for love, a girl looking for who she was, a coming of age story in this period of time. So that's the struggle was to balance the fictional parts and the fictionalized parts and the history. But I didn't want to become a history book. It had to be a young adult book. So
Yes.
it's about love, and it's about who am I? And what am I going to do in my life? These questions, I think, very important.
And also for somebody who's being displaced from the country they've grown up in, there's always
Absolutely.
a huge question of, you know, where do I belong?
Yeah.
What culture do I belong to?
Yeah.
You know.
And that's a very a problem of our time still.
Yes.
I mean, with all those refugees all around the world, it's like everybody's having this in, very strong way, this question. Yeah.
So, Ernestine, I just wanted to ask you about how you got the book out of Holland. So you basically brought it to London Book Fair and very bravely pitched it to a number of publishers. So, what made you do that? And, thank you for doing that.
Well, it was a bit naive, I think, really, in hindsight. I was at a Dutch History Festival looking for a publisher for this book, and also for a biography I've written about sort of the same period, woman in the same period. And one of the publishers, and I think he was actually trying to get rid of me, said, well, you just take them to the London Book Fair and find yourself a publisher there. And obviously that's a huge venue, and it's more for literary agents and publishers making deals. And there I was with my 2 manuscripts, and you were kind enough to let me pitch the book, the Syl's book. And that was the very last day, the last afternoon of the whole London Book Fair, I think. So I was getting quite desperate at the time. But I think we connected and understood each other's mission, and we're both interested in the same things, in strong women, in Asian history, in getting these stories out there. And I think we just, we got talking, and you agreed to have a look at the manuscript, and we took it from there. So it was a bit of just a jump in the deep end, I suppose, to go to London and say, look, here's this Dutch book, and I think it's worth publishing. But there you are. That's the way it went.
Yes, and it had a number of elements in it that related to my own life and my personal history. So that made me prick up my ears and think, oh, I better read this one. And, I think that's often the way that deals are done in publishing. It's often a person-to-person relationship and finding something which you have in common, which speaks to you. So thank you.
Yes, because the story has to speak, but you also have to work together, the author, the translator, and the editor, because there were some changes to the Dutch manuscript because it was republished in the Netherlands at the same time this summer. So Syl made some alterations, and we had to deal with all that. So it was nice that we could work together.
Very nice.
Fruitfully, and then there was this Bondi Beach connection, Cheryl, which I understand
Absolutely.
is where you.
Well, having grown up there and spent the first 7 years of my life there, it was really lovely to be revisiting that in some of the chapters. And as I said before, my dad was actually a lifesaver in the Bondi Surf Club. So
yeah, that's great.
He would have probably even met Nora. Who knows? So that's a nice connection too. I suppose we should also thank the Dutch Literature Foundation for their support for the translation, and also for the Arts Council of England for their support of my press. So
absolutely, very grateful to them. Yes.
Yeah. So thank you very much for today and for talking about Girl Out of Place. We hope more people will be able to watch this on the women. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you. Bye-bye.